Elsewhere, the Federal Resources Minister Madeleine King says she won't oppose rare earths miner VHM Resources from selling 60% of its output to Chinese processor Shenghe Resources. This is despite efforts by the US and Australia to reduce the reliance on China's rare earths processing, which currently produces around 85% of the world's supply. Let's bring in here John Coyne, Head of Northern Australia's Strategic Policy Centre for the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. John, good to have you in the program. That seems almost at odds, that decision, with what Australia has been trying to do with China, or is it really at odds with it?
Look, I think it really is at odds. And I think, one country that's learned the hard way around this is Japan, and I'll to add to that list. And the real issue here is that that monopolistic control over the market represents a vulnerability to our supply chains. We could be talking the hypothetical here, but we're not. We've seen, before we get on to coercive economics, what we've seen in the past is domestic decisions in regards to the Chinese Communist Party impacting on the supply of AdBlue in this country, impacting on the global availability of magnesium, wrought magnesium and aluminium, and impacting on prices, and then using, as we've seen, economic coercion as well in the rare earth space, directly against the Japanese 10 years ago, and more recently against Lockheed Martin. And we've seen that they want to maintain control of that.
So the trade battle between, the United States and China, that led to direct threats that it would, limit the export of rare earths, the processed rare earths. Now, Australia has the raw material, but it's the processing that's the key here, and that's where China is dominant.
Look, absolutely. And I think, for a country that have really been built over the last several decades on mining, rare earths is an interesting area. We think of it as a mining activity, but really, I'm not playing with words here, but realistically, it's a metallurgical process, a series of processing, so a very long supply chain. So, here in Australia, we often hear people talk about the moonshot of making semiconductors. Well, look, the moonshot really is making magnets, making other similar things like batteries and technology, etc. And to get there, we've got to go through a very lengthy metallurgical process with these rare earths. So we want our country to be more than miners. On rare earths, we have to move along that supply chain. Secondly, there's a real reason why the big miners aren't involved in this, Ross, and that is that, realistically, the demand for rare earths fluctuates, prices fluctuate, very difficult for investors to get a handle on this. And ultimately, as it stands at the moment, without government intervention, without like-minded government intervention, what we see is much of that value chain, much of that processing is done in China. And in fact, for those statistics, those heavy rare earths, which is a smaller family of the rare earths, 100% of those are processed in mainland China.
OK, so then we go to, say, Lynas, another rare earths miner, where the Department of Defence in the United States has helped to fund a processing plant there to be able to take the reliance off China. And the reason partly is because all of their military hardware relies on these rare earths. There's, hundreds of kilograms in some of those stealth bombers, for example.
Look, absolutely. I think what we look at Lynas is, Lynas's history, without going in detail, it finds its origins 12 years ago from investments from the Japanese government looking to find an alternative secure supply chain of rare earth elements. They had to take a long-term bet with that equity investment over 8 years before ore was being processed. The US are making a similar bet, but in the meantime, it's Australia missing out here. And when I say that, we talk a lot about manufacturing and bringing manufacturing back to Australia. There's a real opportunity here for this country to be more than miners, to move along that supply chain or that value chain, and for that to be done here in Australia. But that will require a great deal of cooperation from countries as diverse as Korea, Japan, the US, and certainly a number of European nations.
I'll tell you what, John Coyne from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Good to talk to you today. Many thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ross.